During a World War II weapons test, a giant rocket-powered the massive, unpredictable machine turned direct. Wartime rocket canisters broke completely loose from their crude mechanical brackets. Thick steel control cables snapped violently under the immense mechanical stress. The out-of-control machine collapsed heavily onto the dark sand, This chaotic incident was not an accident involving. This exact catastrophic device was intended to be the final production model. Britain planned to pack that central steel cylinder with heavy structural payloads. The ultimate target was the heavily fortified line of the coastal wall. Massive concrete fortifications guarded the...
Any specialized demolition team crossing the open...
The High Command desperately wanted a machine that could breach defenses first.
The Admiralty handed this critical problem to an highly...
The secretive engineering group was known by its legendary wartime nickname. Their institutional mandate was not to make engineering ideas sound reasonable. Their job was to test ideas ordinary committees might reject instantly. The challenge required a machine powerful enough to reach reinforced defenses. The proposed technical solution was far stranger than the original problem. Dangerous. The engineering team officially named this massive device. The structure used two massive wheels surrounding one central payload drum. Each specialized wooden wheel stood approximately 10 feet in diameter. The heavy central cylinder gave the machine its unusual mass and momentum.
During testing, engineers used an inert weighted cylinder.
A vintage naval landing craft would carry the device toward the beach. Once the landing craft reached shallow water, the forward ramp would descend. Dozens of solid fuel rockets were attached to spin the wheels. The spinning machine would roll through water directly onto the sand. The operational production version was expected to travel at high speeds. Its immense speed and mass would carry it through defensive obstacles. The goal was simple: reach the barrier before defenders could stop it. On paper, the entire operational sequence looked brutally simple. But coastal testing grounds do not behave like engineering paper. The initial experimental prototype used exactly 8. For safety during trials, the central cylinder carried a heavy inert load. The massive, unstable machine was secretly transported toward the rocky coast. Controlled coastal field trials officially began at Devon in September 1943. Technical observers watched from a safe distance as the first run started. For a brief moment, the mechanical rolling structure actually moved forward. Then several unguided rocket canisters suddenly broke loose from the wheel. The directional propulsion became completely uneven across the dual wheel structure. The giant rolling device veered dangerously. The unbalanced machine collapsed heavily into the wet sand and stopped. The underlying engineering flaw was not difficult for technicians to identify. One single detached canister could immediately...
Different patches of coastal sand introduced highly...
Even perfect propulsion alignment could not guarantee... The experimental department refused to abandon the rolling mechanism project. They aggressively increased the total number of propulsion canisters to 66. Adding more rocket canisters produced a massive amount of forward momentum.
But the modification also created many more opportunities for mechanical failure.
A third central wooden rim was attached to stabilize the drum. The additional stabilization did not solve the primary directional steering problem. So the engineering team decided to add thick steel control cables. Ground operators would manually apply physical tension from behind the device. At low operational speeds, the steering method appeared somewhat promising, but the mechanical forces increased rapidly as the wheels gained velocity. The steel line fibers began to separate under the immense strain. Under full tension, the steering cable snapped and whipped above the operators. The manual cable steering system had instantly become an additional hazard. A crude protective barrier appeared before they initiated the next attempt. The experimental testing continued despite the repeated failures of the system. But the coastal terrain kept introducing highly volatile physical variables. Every slight path deviation dramatically altered the direction of the machine. The prototype remained immense, completely unpredictable.
By January 1944, senior military observers...
The giant mechanical device was prepared for one final serious field trial. The ramp lowered, and the enormous wooden wheels began rolling toward the beach. During the initial moments, the heavy mechanical prototype ran almost perfectly. The out-of-control wheel accelerated through a dense trail of white smoke. Then, a critical rocket mount suddenly failed under the immense stress. A single detached canister broke completely free and shot across sand. A stray dog named Aminal frantically chased one of the loose canisters. The remaining rocket propulsion canisters no longer pushed the wheels evenly. The heavy mechanical structure began turning away from its intended target. This time, the massive runaway machine turned directly toward the cameraman. The cameraman retreated rapidly while continuing to film the chaotic trial. The enormous, out-of-control mechanical wheel completely filled the lens view. Then it crashed heavily onto the dark sand just before the camera. The chaotic high-level military demonstration was officially over for observers. Fortunately, the experimental prototype was still carrying an inert dummy load. The Great Panjandrum failed its most basic operational performance requirement. The machine could never reliably travel toward its designated coastal target. A natural beach environment offered too many sources of physical imbalance. A single detached propulsion canister produced. The thick steel steering cables introduced their own dangerous failure points. A weapon designed to breach a wall could not cross a beach. The Great Panjandrum prototype never entered actual wartime operational combat, but the bizarre mechanical experiment was not entirely meaningless for engineers.
The weighted dummy load revealed the instability before live payloads were added.
Sometimes the safest military prototype is the one that fails spectacularly. 6. The declassified archive contains other unusual
The mechanical footage preserved one of Britain's strangest experiments in robots.
Some military development files vanished. More forgotten mechanical experiments remain buried. Subscribe immediately to the archive and open the next declassified file.